Are you the quantum mechanics?
Yes, we are the Quantum Mechanics. We're the paranormal podcast for the believers, the doubters, and everyone in between. Weather watch update. I think we'll carry on the paranormal theme. I was thinking reasonable weather to capture images of Bigfoot is the weather today.
That's true. Although he's going to be a sweaty Bigfoot. It's really quite humid.
It's humid. It is humid, but I'm not sure how that affects a cryptid like Bigfoot.
I reckon he's sort of wiping his brow and dripping off his arms. It's not a nice image.
Yeah, no, and they apparently stink anyway, so he's going to be.
They do.
It's going to be very stinky. I think it would be amiss of us not to mention David Grush. I think that's how you pronounce his name at the top of the show. Given the coverage it's had in the media the past week, especially in mainstream media, I mean, it's been amazing.
Yes.
For those of you who don't know, Grush is a former military intelligence officer. He was testifying in front of the US House Oversight Committee looking at UAPs and UFOs. And there were some key takeaways from his testimony, and they had former military pilots like David Fravor, who was involved in the Tic Tac UFO incident. I know he's been on a few things before. I mean, Ben, we could have done a whole podcast on the hearings, but it has been covered extensively. So I just wanted to talk about the key takeaways for me and the feeling I got from it. The key ones were sightings of UAPs and UFOs by pilots, both military and commercial, according to the testimony, are just commonplace, right?
Yeah, that was one of the most shocking things. Wherever the Navy is exercising, I think he said.
Yeah. He also testified that he was informed there's been, in his words, a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program, which kind of backs up a lot of what Bob Lazar has talked
Absolutely. I've been looking at his channels to see if he's said anything, but he hasn't yet.
He's kept quiet so far.
Yeah.
Gross also said that he'd interviewed officials who had direct knowledge of aircraft with, I quote, non-human origins and so-called, I quote, biologics, I think he described it as, biologics recovered from some craft. Now, that is the first time I think I've heard anyone with some kind of official credibility talking about that.
Yeah, it was a confusing word as well, because I know what he means, but I guess it's a more technical word than I'm used to. But it was when he said that I guess I really sat up, because you can talk about machines and you can you can sort of debate, do they come from China, do they come from Russia, and machines are machines, but DNA that we don't recognise, they're very different.
Yeah, I mean, there was some incredible stuff there, and I guess it was impactful enough to be taken seriously by the mainstream media. But I was left with a weird feeling after it all, and I've been really digging deep to find out why I felt uncomfortable with the whole thing. And this is a weird connection, Ben, but strangely it left me thinking about John Lydon's quote at the end of the Sex Pistols' infamous US tour in 1978. That is a bit of a leap to this story.
Okay, go on.
But on that tour and that final gig, a frustrated and downbeat Johnny Rotten said the words to the audience after the last song, "Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?"
Yeah.
And I think that's how I've been feeling about the explosive testimony about UFOs and this alien visitation. I'm not doubting that Grosh and others who testified believe what they're saying, not at all. But it did leave me wondering, from the testimony, it felt like UFOs are permanently flying around airspace. Mm-hmm. If that was the case, really, could it be kept as secret as it's been for so many years?
I suppose a blip on a radar and somebody reporting it are very different to actual physical evidence.
Yeah.
And I think there's also that thing, we know that airline pilots have been grounded for reporting UFOs.
Yeah, that is true, but it's still a lot of people to kind of cover up. The other thing that I heard reported was that the Department of Defense approved, or at least agreed, to Grush's testifying. And that left me with the bigger question of why.
Yeah.
Why would they do that? I mean, you think of all the people that the FBI and defense and the military have, come after for leaking secrets less impactful than this one.
Yeah. So you're sort of suggesting maybe there is a nefarious sort of bigger game plan going on here.
Yeah, because for me, I thought, is this another step in, full and real disclosure? Mm-hmm. But it does beg the question. It seems that process seems to be taking a hell of a long time.
It's very slow, isn't it? It's disclosure by 1,000 revelations.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know. Is it? I just keep coming back to, is it kind of some form of misdirection that's about secret US technology or technology from someone like China? And this is all about, almost like a magician, bit of misdirection, look over here. So those two things, it's either there is something going on and this is the start of a slow disclosure process, or, it's to cover up something else. So I don't know. It's always the case, isn't it, with these UFO things, no matter what the evidence or testimony comes out, there's always a bit of you that goes, this is a rabbit hole, and they're trying to stick us down one area of the maze rather than another area. So,
yes,
I don't know.
Yeah, and then, of course, the CIA came out and said, we don't know anything about this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very possible, isn't it, that the information is so siloed that it only exists within strata of personnel in different agencies and military sections. So perhaps what the CIA is saying is true, and perhaps what Grosh is saying is true.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm not doubting he is telling what the truth as he's seen it or as he's been told, but it's just what he's been told. I guess the real, glimmer of hope out of the whole thing is the mainstream media is taking it seriously. It's not being reported as, little green men, you know what I mean?
We haven't got the X-Files music playing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, amazing revelations, you know what I mean? It's like it is being taken as a serious story. So I think if more serious journalists, I know the New York Post and people have been really good at looking into it in a serious way, but I think the more journalists that look into it, maybe the more we'll find out.
I think that's absolutely right. And all we can... I mean, I suppose the other bit about it is the elements where they say, I can't tell you about that unless we're in closed session. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I suppose the thing I'm hoping for is we'll have some revelations that get relayed from closed sessions, whether that's on purpose or leaked, I don't know. Yeah. But, yeah, the if you want to listen to the full unadulterated session, it's a long session, it's over 3 hours, and I think it's probably best listened to rather than watched on YouTube because it's just talking faces. But I noticed that the podcast Somewhere in the Skies with Ryan Sprague, they put out on the same day, so that's last Wednesday, the full session just as an audio clip on their feed. That's worth listening to. I've listened to that a couple of times, listening for nuggets. Yeah, definitely. I mean, yes, do a bit of your own digging around. I mean, as I said, we could have covered the whole thing today, but, it's everywhere. So I think a quick summary and just a little bit of our thoughts and, go and dig a bit deeper. Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, staying on the UFO theme, I am, as probably anybody who's remotely interested in the paranormal, interested in the moon and the moon landings, and if there is really something going on with the moon that we don't know. And I was inspired to do this I just came across on YouTube, there's some guy who's taken video imagery of what looks like craft flying around the moon. And, he's not the only one. I found a few like that. But I went back to see if I could find some great source material, someone who's really looked into this with a serious eye. And I came across this book, which I was vaguely aware was out there, but I decided to dive into it. So it's George Leonard's Somebody Else is on the Moon from 1976. And his book is all about how he believes he can see machinery in the pictures that NASA have published of the moon. Right. Now, straight away, as soon as I dived into the book, I felt it had similarities to Ringmakers of Saturn. You remember that one?
I do indeed. That the rings of Saturn were made by alien spacecraft. Massive, from what I remember, the size of small countries.
And they're hiding in them. Yeah. So this book, it feels a little the same. It's that distance of 50 years makes things seem perhaps a little naive. But that doesn't mean he doesn't have a point. But I would say that the byline, incredible proof of an alien race on the moon, the word proof is doing a lot of heavy lifting in there. But just before I dive into his book, I just want to sort of set up the scene for what happened around the time that he wrote this book and sort of in the immediate aftermath. So in the late 70s, there was a lot of chatter about the moon. We were only 10 years away from having landed on the moon, of course, by 79. And I found this quote. So according to a NASA employee, Otto Binder, that's a good name, isn't it? It's a good name. Unnamed radio hams with their own VHF receiving facilities that bypass NASA's broadcasting outlets picked up the following exchange. So NASA, what's there? Mission controller calling Apollo 11. I can't really do an actor's voice here. Apollo 11. These babies are huge, sir. Enormous. Oh my God, you wouldn't believe it. I'm telling you that other spacecraft out here, lined up on the far side of the crater edge. They're on the moon and watching us. And that comes out at the same time, again, 1979, as Maurice Shacklein, former chief of NASA Communications Systems, confirmed that Armstrong had indeed reported seeing 2 UFOs on the rim of a crater. The encounter was common knowledge in NASA, he revealed, but nobody has talked about it until now. That sounds like what you were just saying there about the Congress hearings, right? Yeah. So many people knew about it. How come no one's talking about it?
True.
And then I noticed, so I was looking for anything slightly more contemporary. There's from 2018, there's a report in lots of the press. The one that I've got is actually from the Daily Star in the UK. Former US Air Force Sergeant Carl Wolf waited 30 years after the alleged incident to tell his story. And his story is that he saw pictures of bases on the dark side of the moon. And in 2018, he died in a car accident just as he was beginning to tell everybody his story. Right. And I thought, well, yeah, I mean, possibly there's a conspiracy there.
I guess, I'm always struck by when you see those dramatizations of the Apollo missions, all the astronauts are driving like the top sports cars, aren't they? These guys are risk takers, so
they are. I'm
not sure they're going to be setting their speedo to just be 5 miles under the speed limit.
No, exactly. But what Wolf said he saw ties into the book. He claims to have seen huge geometric shapes and masts that look like radar antenna that you would find on Mars. All right. So if we get back to the journey in the book, because I think this is quite telling, the sort of the story he lays out. The first thing the author does, and he's an ex-NASA employee himself, is that he is looking out for somebody almost to guide him through. So an insider in NASA. He's left NASA by now, and he wants an insider. And straight away, he gets put in touch with, it's not his real name, this guy's Dr. Samuel Whitcomb, who's an engineer and, as you might imagine, an astronomy enthusiast.
You can tell that's a made-up name for NASA and the space program, because they have got names like Wolf and Iron Fist.
Yeah.
That name's just far too normal.
Chad Wachowski. Yeah. Samuel Whitcomb is surprisingly mundane. Yeah. But he appears through the book as a kind of... in my notes, I said he's like a smoking man, because he every so often the author kind of goes back to him and says, where should I look now? What should I do? And he says, oh, well, maybe you should look at this photograph. And I'm not telling you what to look for, but study the bottom right-hand corner really carefully. That kind of infuriating evidence that Mulder never quite got, but was sort of intimated to. Yeah. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And there's a part of me, again, with that 50-year sort of lens on it of, well, if everything he's saying in here, and I don't disbelieve, I believe he believes everything that he's saying in here, it does smack slightly of disinformation, of kind of, well, we can make this look a lot more ridiculous if we do this, and then somebody comes out with a book about it, and then we can all point and laugh.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Tying back to Grosch, we were talking about on the top of the show, because I think a lot of his testimony was, people have told me. Do you know what I mean? Rather than first-hand knowledge. So it's interesting if you buy into the conspiracy theories. That is a consistent pattern, isn't it? Pick someone who wants to talk about this stuff, who maybe, you mentioned Mulder, who wants to believe, feed him a little bit of information or disinformation, and then just watch that plant grow,
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, the first sort of thing that he points at as being like the thing that gets his head scratching is the story of the origin of the moon. I mean, like, I don't mean the made up story, the sort of how we believe it is formed. And he says at the moment, writing from 1976, he says there are two main ways that people believe the moon came into being. So it either came together from dust and matter at the same time as the Earth and the other planets were formed, making it like a true sister body, or it was a wandering asteroid in space, a thing of, like, as he puts it, rags and tatters, that got captured by the Earth when it came too close. But he says, okay, so that's possible, and the second one I think he believes in more. But he points out, why do some rocks on the moon, why are they older than the rocks on Earth? And that is still true today. I checked it out. Okay. So some of the rocks on the moon date back at least 4 billion years, some of them perhaps longer. But we rarely find a rock on Earth that is beyond 3.8 billion.
And I guess the first thing that jumped into my head is all the impact craters on the moon, so they could have been hit by, but I guess we would have been going through the same process on Earth as well, so they should exist here, right?
Well, so that's the other thing he says. Craters and their origins. He believes that, again, we haven't got to the bottom of this. So he says the notion that volcanic eruptions formed a lot of craters is now out of fashion, and that is still not in fashion at all. He says some scientists believe that probably some of them were formed by volcanic eruptions, but not the larger craters, and not a significant percentage. And there are other theories to account for the origin of craters, but none of the theories really cover the whole gamut. They can't explain the huge craters and the little craters and the different ways that they manifest. So some of the little ones have little spray patterns around them, that sort of familiar thing. Some of the larger ones have no spray patterns at all, he claims, which I didn't realise, but he and again he says, and wouldn't the Earth, but then of course the Earth does have an atmosphere and would burn up a lot of these things, so that is a good explanation for that.
And I guess we know there was volcanic activity on the Earth, so a lot of them could have been covered up, right? That's
right. But it's this idea of the moon is a very strange body. Where did it come from? And these craters are ill explained. That leads him to sort of question what NASA might be saying internally. And he says that he believes that there's a lot of NASA scientists who talk privately about the spraying and carving that can clearly be seen on many NASA photographs. So in this case, by spraying, I mean suspended molecules of dust in the air around craters. And this is where he starts moving into right, so these are some of the things that I've seen, and move straight from this sort of curious question as to what could have caused all these craters.
And I mean, I'm no geologist, but I really am not.
Oh, well, I've very much misunderstood what you do.
Yeah, welcome to the geology podcast. I'm sitting here thinking, wouldn't that be created by an asteroid or some a meteor hitting the surface of the moon? Wouldn't it just create that spray pattern, or is that not the case?
Well, so that the spray patterns, yes, but the suspended dust in the air, and we'll get onto it later, but he says in some photographs there is dust above a crater, and then a photograph taken later there is no dust. Okay. So, but the crater is of older origin.
Right.
So this is where he starts talking about the machines that are mining.
Right, so something has happened to make that dust go away, and that's not logically possible with our conventional understanding of the moon.
Yes, right. Yes. I got you. And so he then begins the next chapter, a machine the size of the Bronx, a motor the size of the Bronx, I'm sorry.
That's very Ringmaster Saturn, isn't it?
Exactly.
You don't have a mini metro, you've got to go full on Juggernaut, haven't you?
Yeah. And so and you can look this up if you like. So I'm going to reference a few photographs. These photographs are at the back of his book. Unfortunately, because this is a reproduction of the original pressing of the book, the plates haven't survived brilliantly in the reproduction, and the photographs at the back of the book are very, very difficult to make anything out of. I've even used a magnifying glass.
So you can't see the JCB logo on the side.
Well, no, but you can look up on the NASA archive, you can look up some of these photographs. So there's one that he references, and this is the one where he believes he could see this machine, 72H1387, very, very catchy.
Yeah.
And
that's my favourite NASA photo.
He says, if you look carefully at the half-inch area just above the rim of the crater, which is known as Lubinicky A, and he says you get used to the light and shadow, and then if you use a reading glass, he says, look at that. Can you see the shaft of the gear sticking out? Just below it, the remains of another, larger gear. It seems as though part of it has been ripped away, exposing its inner teeth. And he's drawn a little diagram, which unfortunately is worse than the diagram that I drew when I did remote viewing. But he says he can see this, and to test whether he thinks, whether he's seeing things or not. And I will give him this. He isn't just going, yep, I see this. He goes and finds another friend of his from NASA. And again, it's a made-up name. And he says, without setting him up, he says, look, have a look at this photograph, this specific area. I want you to draw and write what you see. If you match what I have drawn, then you buy me dinner. If you can't see what I can see, I'll buy you dinner. Right. And he says at the end of the chapter, he's buying him dinner. Right. So he claims that this other NASA scientist draws this similar gear fashion, and basically he takes this as agreement that he is seeing what he is seeing. He believes this is a machine.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking pareidolia a little bit there. I mean, that's what I often think about these things with Mars and the moon, And there was a cloud one quite recently where it looked like a lion, and it made the papers. So when you look at it, it looks like a lion. So if you said draw that cloud, you draw a lion, but that doesn't mean it's a lion. Do you know what I mean?
Well, so interesting what you say about pareidolia, because he then goes on to talk about, well, if there are mining operations down there, then presumably you might leave some more, I guess, created shapes rather than nature shapes.
Right, symmetrical.
Well, the first thing that he says he can see is a fleur-de-lis. And he says it's positioned inside this specific crater, And he describes it, he says, inside the crater rim at 10 o'clock is a marvellous sculpture highlighted by the sun. It's a perfect design at the top of a rock pillar, symmetrical from top to bottom. And he draws it down below, and he says the fleur-de-lis is particularly interesting because it appears on the floor of another crater that is being worked on. And I can see what he's talking about in the photographs, but I mean, as you can imagine, it's very small. The chances of something looking like the fleur-de-lis in a body the size of the moon by accident are quite high.
Yeah.
He also goes on to, he reckons...
i.e. likely, you mean?
Likely, yeah.
Yeah.
And he reckons he's found insignia on the moon as well. And this is a drawing that he has made. It's on page 161 of the book. I think we probably can put a picture of this on the social media. He says it was taken from a camera 3.7 miles above the moon's surface in orbit. And he's right. It does look like human writing. You could see a capital A, another capital A, an I, an R, a C, a P, and possibly a V. But...
Are these just random letters, or is he seeing some kind of pattern in the word, being formed?
He's not seeing a word. He is saying that there is perhaps... it's a marking of some sort. So he talks about whether it is like left for us,
right, or
whether it is something that the people who are working the moon, the whoever it is that is working the moon has left it there. But he doesn't answer the question, why are they writing in English?
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. But he uses this...
Maybe it's a translation thing that, you know, what they're doing is for the Apollo mission, it's just a sign that says no parking.
Well, he does say that. He does say that it could just be...
Don't come here.
Yes, it could just be marking saying this mine is finished or something like that.
Right, wow.
And it's just our pareidolia, it looks like our alphabet.
Right.
I think it's more likely that is how the rocks have crumbled, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So then we move on to something that he thinks that he could see all over the moon, and he calls them X-drones. And the way he describes them is the most numerous kind of rig on the moon is a huge object looking like two crossed earthworms. They vary in size from under a mile to 3 miles in any direction. They are not straight-edged, and they are dull metallic in appearance, as are the super rigs described above. So that's the massive machine I was talking about. Right. Although they can lift 1 or 2 legs in doing their work, they do not, as they lie flat on the ground, unlike the super rigs, which sit erect.
How does he know they can lift their legs?
Yeah, this is... Yeah, you see my problem with the author here.
Okay.
Their function, as we shall see, differs from the digging and ground-moving functions of the super rig. And he says, I call them the X-drones because they're as good a name as any. It describes their shape and denotes that they work. And he says, wherever there is a lot of work to be done in certain parts of the moon, the chances are excellent you will find these big X's slaving away, ripping and slicing crater rims, and pulling taut whatever material it is. They're used to stretch across ribs for cover, lifting hundreds of thousands of tons of weight at one time. You don't know that. How can you know that?
I'm curious on location, because is this all happening on, and I know it's not technically accurate, but the dark side of the moon for us?
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, not all of it, but the vast majority, yes.
So that...
Yes.
That would be an interesting study, wouldn't it? Would it? I'm sorry, I'm rolling with it. But if the dark side of the moon was completely different, looked like a mine surface, and the side that we get to look at, you know, every night isn't like that, that would be quite compelling evidence, wouldn't it?
It would, and the two sides do look different, but that isn't necessarily...
because of the way it's set up and structured, and it doesn't rotate, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Yes. So, and the reason that he gives that he talks about the X-drones this way is because, for example, he cites a particular photograph where he can see that some rubble lies at the side of a crater, but the other side of the crater, the rubble, has disappeared. And he says, well, look, it's obviously been moved. I mean, has it obviously been moved? Has it? But that's what he says.
I mean, I may save this point, but maybe we'll come back to it. But what's striking me is, let's go. I mean, we often do this. Let's go with, this is all true. Let's go with, I am the alien civilization. Setting up operation on a satellite of the Earth where there is a kind of human presence and you could be spotted. Either you don't care, or is there something where am I going with this? Is there something unique about the moon that they would take the risk of going there, even though it's close to an inhabited planet? Either they're doing this mining operation all throughout the solar system, right? Or is there something unique about the moon in terms of what's on it?
Well, I will come on to his theories later, but one of his theories is that maybe they're not mining for minerals. Maybe they're doing slow repairs on an ancient spacecraft.
Right.
And I find that very credulous, I'm afraid.
Yeah. That's not a new theory, is it?
It isn't, no.
Yeah.
But
like the hollow moon theory, isn't it? It's like that.
yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it's absolutely the hollow moon theory. Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
Okay.
But just to go back to his evidence, and I use those words advisedly, he does point out that crosses can be seen all over the moon.
Well, it's the worms, isn't it?
Well, no, these are crosses in the rock.
Right.
And he believes, again, these are features so that overhead craft can spot where they are going around the moon. I mean, in 1976, nobody had really thought of sat-nav, I suppose.
Yeah. So some advanced alien technology has to put some X's on some rocks, otherwise they can't land.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yeah. And he bases this on, he talks to a NASA test pilot, and they point out that when they go flying out across the desert, so that they know exactly where they are, there are markers on the ground. And he says, well, that's what these must be, markers. Yeah. And I don't know. But then there's one very specific cross that he points out looks like something we've seen before. Let me just show you this picture. Listeners, I've balanced my coffee too close to my computer. But look at that.
Yeah, got that.
What does that remind you of?
I was thinking Hangman.
No. Where have we seen that before in a UFO case?
Oh my God.
Lonnie Zamora.
Yes. Wow. Okay. You're right. So this is a symbol. It's a straight line going up vertically. It's almost like an arrowhead, isn't it? Pointing straight up.
Yes, like a roof shape on the top.
Oh God, that is exactly the same as... Did Lonnie say he saw it on the craft itself?
It was an insignia on the craft.
Yes. Oh, that is weird, actually.
And that was in 1964.
So is this the symbol that he says are on the rocks?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Had the Lonnie Zamora thing happened at that
Yeah,
point?
that was 64.
Yeah, okay.
But I can see that shape where he says he can see it.
Again, though, it's not the most complex of shapes, is it?
It isn't the most complex of shapes, no.
And like you said, if pareidolia-wise, if it is likely that if you search on the moon or on Mars or anywhere else, you're going to find something that looks like the fleur-de-lis, you're certainly going to come across something that looks like an arrow, right?
I think so. But I thought it was interesting that he pulled the two together. And
so did he make the Zamora connection? Or?
Yeah, he did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just for anyone, I mean, I'm sure you're all aware, we have done an episode on Lonnie Zamora. So Lonnie Zamora was a member of the police.
He was a police officer, yeah.
Police officer in America. He was chasing, I think it was like a stolen car or something like that in the desert, and then he spotted a UFO with what he believed were aliens wandering around, and he called it in, and the military and other people came along, and yeah, there was scorched earth and all kinds of stuff going on. It's a really intriguing case. So if you've not listened to the podcast on it, if you do a little search for Lonnie Zamora, You can go back and find it. Well, actually, we'll probably stick the link to it in the show notes as well, so you can go straight there. But it's an intriguing, brilliant story.
It's one of my favourite UFO stories. Yeah.
And he, by talking about it, he was treated quite badly as well, wasn't he?
He was.
Yeah.
But to sort of the last two pieces of evidence, and this whole book is really, it's a bit like Ringmakers of Saturn in that, again, he hits an argumentation upon an argumentation, which do feel like hypotheses built upon hypotheses.
Yeah.
But this is interesting. He shows a plate where he calls the chapter Objects Which Move Uphill. And there are two long trails that he points out, 900 feet and 1,200 feet long, and they are left by a rock which is 75 feet across, two rocks that are both the same size, roughly the same size. They come from the inside of a crater and they move up and over the lip. And he says, what could have caused that? Could it be volcanic action? But he said, I have to remind you, NASA have said that the moon is volcanically quiet at the moment.
Yeah.
So what could have caused it? It must be mechanical activity.
Must be.
Well, I think is one of his most intriguing pieces of evidence.
Yeah.
Although, are we sure that they're tracks? I think that's where I go to.
But again, I keep coming back to it, but even a small meteor could cause that disturbance, couldn't it? Crashing into the surface.
And then rolling up using its
even
inertia.
Because of the speed it's travelling on, it doesn't actually have to be big, right? It could be the size of a tennis ball, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true.
It's interesting, though, isn't it? Because I think the comparison with the Ringmakers to Saturn is a really good one. Something about, I wonder if it's to do with publishers and shifting the books, because it's very similar, isn't it? Somebody with NASA experience looking at old photos, finding something, and almost, I mean, I've not read that book that you're talking about today, but it'd be interesting if you agree with what I'm going to say, is it's almost like, oh my God, look at that photo, that could be this, and then they're off, you know what I mean? Nothing else comes into play from then on in, and almost everything you're doing is standing it up. I think that the X's is a really good example, because like you said, we don't need that anymore. You've got GPS and navigation, and you've got to think that an advanced alien species would have their own version of GPS and wouldn't have to put an X on some rocks in order to land. But because that was how they did it at the time, you almost, to use a pun, reverse engineer it to fit your story.
Yes, yeah, I think that's a very good point. I don't think for one second that he hasn't set out to prove his theory. I don't think he's been massively objective with this, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
But his last piece of sort of argumentation, it's interesting because it does tie into the phenomena of lunar transient phenomena, which you probably have heard of, where you can see things on the moon, usually lights, actually,
right,
that appear in one day and then not the next. And I will talk about that in a minute because it is still somewhat of a mystery to us. But he talks about gas and this these plumes of dust, right, that he says are there once and then they're not there in the second photo. And he calls this gas ejection.
Right.
And he says if this gas ejection is the result of industrial activity, which I believe it is, as opposed to the excretion of used atmosphere, then there must be times when the smelters shut down and the fires cease. Then another picture on another day, treated the same, blown up the same, would show no gas ejections. So he's sort of he's talking like a Victorian smelting house here.
Yeah, almost, Industrial Revolution imagery going on.
That's
there.
right, yeah.
Interesting.
So...
do we know if the Ringmakers of Saturn and this are roughly the same time period, aren't they?
Yeah.
I wonder if they knew each other, the authors. You know what I mean? Can you imagine going out to dinner with those two? That'd be brilliant, wouldn't it? God, we could take our mics down there, just record and let them go. That'd be incredible. Because there are parallels, aren't there, with what they're saying. Which I guess some people could argue gives it some credibility. You know, it's a mining or some kind of almost industrial process that's going on the moon, and to create the rings of Saturn. Yeah, they'd have a great old discussion if they didn't know each other and got together.
Oh, yeah, they would. I mean,
but the Ringmakers of Saturn guy also talked about activity on the moon, didn't he? He kind of touched on it, but not in much detail.
Yeah. Well, he claimed that the large crater was caused by the exhaust of a giant spaceship. Yeah. Which, in a way, is slightly madder than this.
Yeah.
But he then speculates, like, maybe some of these things are set up to attract our attention. Now, I would refute that because there are much better ways of attracting our attention.
Ways, right?
But he does go through, now this is interesting. These are the different ways that scientists in the past have suggested that we signal to other races, because he uses this as a bit of a backdrop.
That's good. I like that.
The mathematician Carl Friedrich Gauss suggested that forest lanes might be planted in Siberia to form a gigantic right-angled triangle. Squares could be erected on each side to illustrate the Pythagorean theorem. So, that's a good mathematical one. So, giant forest lanes.
Okay.
The astronomer Joseph Johann von Littrow urged that canals be dug in the Sahara, forming geometric figures 20 miles on a side. At night, kerosene could be spread over the water and lit.
That's genius. But why would we need to do that? Isn't it obvious we're an inhabited planet?
Well,
with all the lights and everything going on. Well, I guess that depends how old these theories are. But yeah,
no, you're right. The French scientist Charles Cross wanted his government to construct a vast mirror to reflect sunlight to Mars.
Right.
And Bernard M. Oliver, I don't know who that is, he's an electronics engineer, told the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics that that intelligent radio signals are probably pouring in on Earth undetected, and he urged the construction of sensitive equipment to listen. And so that is the first sort of...
Sounds very SETI.
It is, yeah. And of course he points out that Nikola Tesla wanted us to send messages. So we're doing both now. We're listening and sending. Yeah. As far as I know, we haven't built a giant canal in the desert. But
has anyone got a match?
But he says, whether that is true or not, whether those fleur-de-lis, I mean, it's a kind of a bizarre thing, is it? How will we tell these humans we're here? Do they make a fleur-de-lis on the dark side of the moon?
Or do we just fly our huge spaceship into their atmosphere and say,
we're
wave
here
at them? Yeah.
So,
I'm not buying that, are you?
No, I'm not buying that, no. So a few of his theories as to what is going on. So you ask, why? What are they doing? Why are they mining there? Are they mining throughout the rest of the universe? So he says the wide range of technology that he claims to have seen on the moon suggests there are a number of races on the moon. So he says, for example, the crater spraying appears to be localized. So he's saying, okay, they're used by various people or people's civilizations, and they're using different techniques to get different things out of the moon. I mean...
Again, it seems like a leap that there's one alien species mining the moon. Well, just because the equipment and what they're doing is different, he leaps to the assumption that there's more than one alien species there. That's a bit odd to me.
Yep.
Okay.
He also says that they're probably there to extract rare elements. I mean, yeah, possible.
That's like that mobile phone element that you need. Is it that? It's basically for alien mobile phones. There's a lot of it on the moon.
That's right.
Yeah.
Although he does point out that he thinks that everything on there is possibly just mechanized and therefore either AI or cybernetic control. Which begs the question, why do you think they shut down their smelters at night?
Yeah.
If they're mechanized.
Well, then in the 70s, now that doesn't sound weird that he's saying it, but in the 70s that would have been quite shocking, wouldn't it? AI?
It would have been shocking.
Yeah.
But the most shocking thing that he says is he thinks it's possibly a base for the hybridization program on Earth. Right. So again, we have that familiar trope. But why you need to dig up a crater to hybridize humans, I don't know.
Yeah. He's definitely thrown spaghetti against the wall at this point, isn't he?
I think the whole thing, unfortunately, is spaghetti, and I think it's one man trying to make sense of. Sure, they do look anomalous things in the photographs, but they don't look that anomalous.
Yeah.
Not really.
Yeah, it's amazing the power of that pareidolia, though, isn't it? If it
Oh yeah.
or this type of pareidolia, maybe. I know it's probably not technically, but it always fascinates me that when the Mars photos and oh look, there's a face on the thing of Mars, and we've all seen them, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. And of course, it's not a face the next time you fly over.
Yeah, yeah.
But I thought it'd be interesting just to point out that he isn't the only person to spot odd lunar happenings, but the other people to spot odd lunar happenings are, I would guess, coming at it from a very different scientific perspective. So this from the Society for Popular Astronomy. Lunar observers have noticed that the moon's surface is occasionally host to anomalous transient lunar phenomena. So what I was talking about before.
These are the lights. I'm into the lights.
Which have assumed a variety of forms, including isolated flashes, pulses of light, coloured glows, and obscurations of portions of the lunar surface. Just why the science of astronomy has been unwilling to accept that our satellite occasionally displays obvious signs of activity is almost a bigger mystery as TLP themselves. NASA's belated inquiries represented a grudging acknowledgement that the moon might not actually be the dead world it is so convincingly advertises itself to be for most of the time. It was in NASA's interest, however, to downplay the idea of an active moon. Known factors in lunar exploration were hazardous enough to plan for and contend with, without having to admit that there might be some unknown threat to the Apollo lunar astronauts, which could jeopardise the $25 billion program.
So this is not from the book. This is from the astronomy.
This is from the astronomy. Yeah,
an active moon. Are they saying that's kind of geological and natural, activity,
yes.
not necessarily extraterrestrial? No. Right.
I like this one. One of the most notable TLP sightings occurred at 8:45 on the 19th of July, 1969, when the crew of Apollo 11 observed the northwest wall of come on,
it's time for our bad pronunciation.
Aristarchus to be displaying some kind of peculiar luminous activity. At the same time, German astronomers Pruss and Witt of the Institute for Space Research in Bochum, observing with a 150mm refractor, noted brightenings in I said it before, Aristarchus lasting 5 to 7 seconds. So they don't know what it is, but they observed it both at close range and far distance.
And verified by two sources.
Verified by two sources.
Wow, that is really interesting, that, isn't it?
But it's not a thing. It's not saying it's a mining operation. It's literally saying that the NASA didn't sort of go, oh yeah, maybe it's some sort of weird geological thing, because they don't want somebody turning around and saying, well, you're not flying that $25 billion craft there then.
It could be some alien crisp packet that landed on the moon is reflecting the sun.
But wouldn't you, if you knew this, if this was such a big secret around NASA, you'd do all you could to stay off the moon and stop looking at the moon, wouldn't you?
Or the opposite. You try and make first contact, and I don't know, actually. I was thinking more the other way. Wouldn't we still be going back there, even secretly? Maybe we are.
Well, we are going back.
We are going back.
Yeah, because I was looking, because I don't know, until I looked into this, I sort of vaguely knew we were going back, but I didn't know when. This from space.com, American astronauts in 2024 will take their first steps near the moon's south pole. It's known as the land of extreme light and extreme darkness at that point, to see if it could fuel NASA's Artemis lunar base and the agency's leap into deep space. And basically, it goes on to explain that scientists are looking for the perfect place to put Artemis base camp. Why would you be sending astronauts to the moon to look for a place to put base camp if you think there are X drones wandering around that might dig it up?
Although if you're going to buy into the conspiracy theory, NASA have just been waiting for the mining operation to finish. Maybe they've all left now.
Well,
and we need to good time to explore because it's less dangerous. I'm just feeding
that
into
is a good
the
time
hysteria.
to explore. That is yes. No, you're right. You're right. You'd get on really well with George Leonard if he was.
I really want that. Go back in time and want that dinner to happen.
But you remember back in the time when War of the Worlds was written, we truly believed that the images that we saw on the moon were canals and seas. The Sea of Tranquility is on the moon because that's what they look like. Yeah. It is not what they are. Yeah. I think, unfortunately, George Leonard has got entangled in something that he probably didn't understand. It's possible that there were nudges and winks on between NASA because of some of the things that the astronauts saw, but I don't think he saw giant JCBs. So
what you're saying is it's almost there's something there. There's something weird, and they've set the spark flying, but he's gone and run off with that ball at high speed, hasn't he?
He really has.
But I'm struck. I remember when we interviewed Paul H. Smith about the remote viewing program, who was one of the key people in the US military remote viewing program. I think it was either towards the end of the interview. We asked him about aliens and stuff. He didn't really want to get into it. But I remember him saying, but there's definitely something weird about the moon, but I'm not going to go into that. You know what I mean?
He did.
Yeah, and there's been a few people like that of going, so I'm with you, Ben. I think, from my believer hat on, that there could be something unusual about the moon, either now or historically. But it's this huge leap that goes into right now. So it's mining operations, and you can see that antenna on that structure there, and that's a big base. It's interesting. If you want to get misinformation out there to detract from something, do they target, again, going back to Grosch, do they target people that they know will run with the ball?
Yeah, and who have the means to do it.
So that, whatever, at the time or a few years later on this kind of podcast, we will go, hold on a sec, he's saying what? There's arrows there that's telling them where to land. How ridiculous. Do they pick people that they know will just run with that, or like the Ringmakers of Saturn type stuff?
Yeah.
But there could be some, fruit of the poison tree. There is something, but it gets distorted deliberately. Picked people maybe by because they think I often, and I'm not saying this is the case with Bob Lazar because I think he has a lot of credibility, but there is so much about Bob Lazar and the history of him and the kind of person he is, doesn't feel like that typical intelligence agency, NASA military person that you would hire. It's like all those ex-military pilots, all the aircraft development that went on at Area 51. These were a certain type of people who could keep all these secrets from their loved ones, let alone go off at some tangent with it. My point is, with Bob Lazar, there is something that maybe they knew he would do what he did and run with it, and that helps the disinformation. Doesn't mean there's not a grain of truth in it.
I agree with you, actually. And if that is the case, is there a more terrifying truth? Charles Fort said, I believe we are property. Yeah. If we are property, maybe the moon is mysterious because it was put there by whoever decided to form the Earth and put humans on there. And maybe the hybridization program is part of a breeding program, just like I breed tropical fish.
Well, that's almost part of the plot of Jupiter Ascending, isn't it?
Yeah.
That the Earth is a farm.
Well, it would make sense, and the moon is our salt lick.
Yeah. That's a really good analogy.
So that, everybody, is how the 1970s thought the moon was.
No wonder they were wearing such big flares.
I was 1 when that book was out.
That's amazing, though. I like. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I'm really glad we cover these old books, because people will go, "Why are you covering that? There's so much more that's come out since then." But it's amazing how it actually sparks debate and discussion, and almost puts things into context of how we've gone through the episode, going back through the whistleblowers that are in front of Congress at the moment to these books and going, "Whoa, this is why we need to be careful."
Yeah, and actually, really, apart from there is a book which I am trying to get hold of. It's out of print, very hard to get hold of. Who Built the Moon? This is the only book where it's not just madness. Everybody else wants to talk about, the famous "I can confirm Santa Claus is real" and all of that, and it's just hearsay. This guy at least got a magnifying glass out, got some photographs, and put forward his theorem.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a great theory, but I would recommend the book to you, though. I mean, it is well written. It isn't impenetrable. It isn't full of equations like the Ringmakers of Saturn is.
Right.
And it is fascinating to think that there are some real mysteries that come out of that. Why is the moon older than the Earth? Why is its geological makeup so different if it was made up of bits of the Earth? Why is it such a perfect size? Why does it make the Earth work? And
I think that perfect size thing that is such a hell of a coincidence, isn't it? The fact that, it can eclipse the sun at the right times perfectly. It's the perfect distance and size to do that. That's one hell of a coincidence. I'm not saying it isn't a coincidence, but wow.
Yeah.
Well, that was amazing. I think the lesson from that episode, Ben, is it's good to look at these things, but you've got to keep your feet on the ground. So I wanted to move on to talking about our ambition to try and make Sherlock Holmes a real person. And the TQM Tulpa project, because to be honest, we've had a bit of a quiet period, haven't we? And I thought, maybe our ambition to, create some activity around Sherlock Holmes has just died its death. We had a bit of a good start, but we have had, this is an interesting one that we've had come through from Sally-Ann Crench. She said, I listened a few weeks ago to the podcast, and I was researching Victorian morgues for history for our paranormal investigations report. That is a good project, isn't it? Victorian morgues, that's got the lot, hasn't it? They said they clicked randomly on an article of interest and saw the name Sherlock Holmes mentioned. Researching the history for the next investigation, found out it's believed to have been used as inspiration for the location of the Hound of the Baskervilles. So this is another one.
That's interesting.
So they were going to go and do the investigation, I guess do some shooting. And she said, today we cancelled the investigation due to bad weather. Hope they had weather insurance. So instead we came home. Being shown on Sky Arts is the Hound of the Baskerville. So they were going to go and shoot. It was cancelled because of the rain. So they thought, well, we'll just watch some Sky Arts, and there's the Hound of the Baskerville.
Wow. Okay, that's
a good
pretty
one.
good. I like that.
Yeah. I think what's coming out of this for me, all the good ones we get are people who are not trying to do the project. And we, I know one of our patrons was saying he'd been doing it religiously every day and had nothing. So I think maybe that is it. Maybe what we should do over the next few weeks is almost forget about the TQM Tulpa project and Sherlock Holmes, and then see if that sparks more. So it's like this experiment is evolving, isn't it? Different methods for trying to get something out of it.
It is evolving. Yes.
And Ben, probably by the end of this, we can write a book that gets published, and in about 50 years, there'll be 2 podcasters going, you can't believe this crazy stuff these 2 people came up with.
They really ran with it, though, bloody idiots.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you for sending it. Keep sending in if you have any of those Sherlock Holmes stuff. Really fascinating. Thank you for that. Thanks all of you who've been saying nice words for us on Facebook and Twitter. If you want to follow us there, it's at TQM Podcast. Big thanks to the Quantum Mechanics Patreons. So if you want to join the Patreon program, go to patreon.com/TQM pod. We're putting some exclusive and early stuff up there now. So yeah, come and join us.
Please do it, because if I could, I'd buy that book. The who made the moon, who built the moon. It's 400 quid.
Blimey.
I know, but I'll buy it. That's literally why I want to get the Patreon thing going.
Yeah.
Because I haven't got 400 quid, but if I had 400 quid, damn right I'd be buying it.
Yeah, definitely. Good. All right. Well, thank you for listening to the Quantum Mechanics. We're going to be back next week. We've got something. Hopefully, I'm not going to give it away, but I'm going to do something a bit unique next week. So it's definitely worth coming back. I know you will anyway, but it's
peculiar special guest.
Yes, we have a strange special guest. That's about as much as we can give away. So we will see you next week. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Are you the quantum mechanics?